Legislative branch, jigsaw activity. Group 8, Congress's non-legislative powers. Part 2. Confirmation and removal. How can Congress influence the selection and removal of government officials? Selecting the president and vice president. After presidential elections, the Constitution requires Congress to convene a joint session to formally count votes cast in the Electoral College. If no candidate receives a majority of the Electoral College votes, the House of Representatives conducts a special election to select a new president. In the special election, each state's House delegation is granted a single vote. Members choose from 3 presidential candidates who receive the most electoral votes. The Senate chooses the vice president by conducting a simple majority vote. The House has been needed to select the president only 2 times in U.S. history. In 1800, it elected Thomas Jefferson over Aaron Burr, and then in 1824, the House selected John Quincy Adams over Andrew Jackson. The 25th Amendment to the Constitution gives Congress several roles in the event of disabilities or vacancies in the executive branch. For example, if there is a vacancy in the office of the president, the amendment requires that the president nominate a replacement. The nominee is then confirmed by both chambers of Congress. The process was needed on 2 occasions in the 1970s and 1973. The House confirmed Gerald Ford to fill the vice presidential vacancy that resulted from Spiro Agnew's resignation. The following year, a second vacancy occurred when Ford himself became president after Nixon's resignation. Congress then confirmed Nelson Rockefeller as vice president. Advice and consent. The Constitution gives the Senate the power to provide advice and consent regarding presidential appointments of ambassadors, other public ministers and counsels, and judges of the Supreme Court. This means that the Senate is responsible for approving the president's nominations for high-ranking positions in the federal government. These include officials of the cabinet and executive departments, diplomatic positions, military officials, and federal judges. The framers gave the Senate power of advice and consent to guard against presidents appointing government officials in exchange for personal favors. They also feared that qualified citizens from their own states might be unfairly excluded from the appointment process. As a result, the framers selected the chamber most likely to represent the interests of individual states for advice and consent role. The Senate quickly confirms the vast majority of more than 1,000 nominations it receives from the executive branch. However, a few hundred of the highest level positions are investigated by the Senate and receive public hearings. In such cases, senators are able to use advice and consent to influence policy. They do this by rejecting nominees or getting nominees to make promises in exchange for confirmation. The Senate also delays confirmation of candidates to increase its influence on the president. In recent years, senators from both political parties have been criticized for abusing advice and consent. Many federal positions, particularly judges, have remained unfilled because senators use delays in the confirmation process as a bargaining tool. Some reform advocates support changing Senate rules to make it easier to bring presidential nominations to the floor for a yay or nay votes. Removal. The Constitution places on Congress the authority to remove the president, vice president, members of the Supreme Court, or other government officials from office for committing treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. An official's removal from office begins with impeachment. This is the formal accusation of wrongdoing. The House of Representatives is responsible for impeaching federal officials. After the House votes to impeach, the Senate conducts a trial to determine whether the accused individual is to be removed from office. Officials who have been impeached will only be removed from office if 2/3 members of the Senate vote for conviction. Congress's power of impeachment is limited to removing individuals from office and possibly disqualifying officials from holding future offices. That power does not extend to assigning fines and jail time. Since the ratification of the United States, the House has started the impeachment process for more than 60 individuals. Less than 1/3 of these federal officials were formally impeached and tried in the Senate. Of these, only 8 office holders were convicted and removed from office by the Senate. 3 U.S. presidents, Andrew Johnson, William Clinton, and Donald Trump, were impeached. None of the 3 was convicted.